I like to say love is like porn. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
I'm ready for it. This is going to be a great soundbite for the opening.
So there was the quote in from the late 70s, I believe it was, a U.S. Supreme Court justice who was having to define what porn is.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some case before the Supreme Court, and they were trying to literally define what's the difference between porn and Italian Renaissance art, for example.
Right.
And this Supreme Court justice said, I know it when I see it. When I see it, I know the difference between porn and art. It's that simple. Same thing with love.
Hi, my name's leowt, and you have found your way to the Conversations podcast. Conversations exist to create spiritually minded conversations about life. We desire to create safe space for dialogue and community. We desire to come together regularly and intentionally to generate conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Everyone is welcome at the conversation.
What is up, friends? It's leowt here with another episode of Conversations. In case you're new here, hey, hello, my name's Leo. I like to have friends on and we talk about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. You're going to find that here every week at Conversations with absolutely one non-negotiable tenet, and that is that everybody's voice matters in the conversation. So I am here with a friend of mine, and we're going to get ourselves started because I feel like we need all of our seconds tonight to talk. So I'm going to have my friend introduce herself, and we'll get this show started.
Well, thank you, Leo. I'm so happy to join you this evening and thrilled to participate with your audience. My name is Rachael Roberts, and I am the founder of American None, and also wrote a book called Confessions of an American None. And it is basically a giant piece of deconstruction, which frankly, I didn't even know that was a thing until after I had written and published the book. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, there's already people talking about this. And
I feel like I'm late to the game.
Well, that's because I'm Gen X, and so I'm not quite as savvy on Instagram. So that was, I think, my main reason for being behind the curve there. But that kind of proves the point of the collective consciousness, right?
Yep.
That there is a wave moving throughout humanity right now, and there's a lot that's going on in the deconstruction and reinvention, so to speak, of what it means to be a spiritual being. So.
Absolutely. When I first saw your page, I think I found you through Mark, the Toxic Jesus page.
Yeah.
And I saw your page and I was like, boom, instant follow. Like it had to happen. And to be honest, I didn't even fully know what you were about, but I'm pretty sure I saw a slide on your Instagram that said exactly what your shirt says, which is love is greater than labels. And as a queer person, I was like, you got me from the jump. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, that's it in a nutshell.
Yes, I love it. So there's two ways we could go, and I'm going to let you pick. I told you I was going to guide this conversation, but we can either start from the perspective of your story or what the hell an American None is. Your choice where you want to start.
Let's start with what the hell an American None is, just because.
All right.
Because that could be just about anybody listening right now.
True.
And then if it still seems interesting and relevant, I'm happy to share whatever about my own story.
All right.
But basically, in a nutshell, a nun, N-O-N-E, for those who are listening and aren't seeing it written, is someone who selects none of the above as their religious affiliations or lack thereof. So this is a term that's been in use for over 20 years, used primarily by demographers and sociologists who were, tracking the religious landscape, both in the United States and then also globally. And the term became a thing when the more polls that these research bodies were doing, people were increasingly selecting none of this. Like, I don't want to identify as atheist. I don't want to identify as Christian. I don't want to identify as Wiccan. Don't put a label on me.
Yes.
And hence this right here.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, that term's been around for a long time, but it hasn't quite seeped into the public consciousness yet. And it's not just someone who says, hey, don't label me. There are reasons for that. There are sociological reasons that have led to this basically mass exodus of people from organized religion. And when I started American None as an organization and an online community, the juxtaposition of American and none is somewhat oxymoronic, because American is very much a label.
Yeah.
And none is the anti-label label. And but I did it on purpose, because being American, growing up in the United States, we have all the cultural trappings that come with that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so we have a unique set of things, issues, things to go to a therapist for, or whatever. And so by leading with the fact that, listen, yes, we are American and all that comes with it, we got to own it, acknowledge it, and then do the work to make right the things that have been done wrongly under the banner of the United States throughout history. But through the process of that, end up in a space where we go, but that label doesn't matter and no labels matter.
Yeah, because there's a very specific set of, I'm really big on like intersectionality, right? And intersectional identity, as well as intersectional points of injustice. And I think that there's a very specific set of privileges that come with being an American. So while there might be other nuns out there in the world, it's a very interesting thing in particular to be an American nun. And so I think by giving it that title, it demands that we first unpack why American needs to be in the title, and then we move ourselves into solidarity with everyone else, which I think is a really interesting point.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, that's okay. Absolutely. I'm all about the acknowledgement. I read a Pew Research study recently, because like something I've learned about myself in my old age of 33 is that I am obsessed with like demographics and data. Like before I go anywhere on vacation, I look up their demographics. Who does that? Me. That's who does that. But I read a study from the Pew Research Institute lately, and they said that churches are at like a 70%, they're 70% less populated than they were at the last decade or something like that, the last segment of study. And basically it's that church attendance now is at an all-time low. But I think what's interesting, and I won't try to hog the conversation, but I want to pitch this, like I wanted to, encompass this for you or set up the question, but I don't see that there's any less of a sense or need for community. And so I wonder if you have any insights on why like church is declining, even though church is like a common place where people find community. What do you think about the intersection of like that need versus the decline?
Well, I think that community is probably the number one reason why people have been going as long as they have for the past several decades. It's been community that's kept people pretending to believe things they don't really believe, because they want to be in a space where they feel like I have a shared value system with I know these are good people because they believe in something greater, or whatever. But eventually, both on a cultural level and then on a micro level, on the individual level, there's a fatigue that sets in, because it's like, can we say bad words on your podcast?
You can say bad words, go for it.
It's like, what the fuck am I doing? You know what I mean? It's like, I'll never forget when I made the decision to quit going to church. I was finishing my master's in theology. I served on the chancel, wore the alb and the rope and the whole 9 yards and did all that. And I loved it. It was actually a very meaningful experience for me, but I was increasingly realizing I don't believe this stuff that we say we believe literally. I can see the metaphors and all that kind of stuff. And then I realized it is more work to get my 3 kids dressed and out of the house to get to church, and everybody hates each other by the time we get there.
Amen. Pastor's kid here.
Yeah. And they hate Sunday school and, blah, 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 blah. And by the time we get home, over half the day is gone. And I just want to go to bed. And so I realized, you know what? I think I will experience more vitality, more love, if I have a peaceful Sunday morning with my children and I take the one day when I'm not working and I can make them breakfast and we can just sleep in late and watch, SpongeBob or whatever.
Yeah.
So it just, church isn't serving people anymore. It doesn't carry forward into the rest of their daily and weekly lives. And so they are having to find community in other places. And there's a lot of places. People go to yoga on Sunday mornings. People go to brunch. Those are very millennial things to do, yoga and brunch.
Hello, I'm a millennial.
Yeah.
I actually had to skip spin class tonight because I had homework. So here we are.
Exactly.
But I think that one of the initial, so this is not where I intended to go with this conversation, but like you've got me on a little bit of a personal area of passion. I think one of the disservices that we've done, right, with Christianity in particular, and American evangelicalism, which is my branch, these are my people. So whether or not they like it, I'm speaking for us here. And something that we've done is we lost a lot of focus on what the gospel was and wasn't. And I actually think perhaps that, maybe as an offshoot of colonization, who knows, but we made the gospel individual when it was supposed to be communal, right? And so we lost that communal element. And my generation, millennials, are hallmarked by the simultaneous disenfranchisement with community, but also crave for it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the ways in which we just lost the whole damn plot.
Well, I agree. I think that's definitely, there's been a lot that kind of drifted from the original course that I think Jesus via his teachings were trying to advance in the world.
Yeah.
To me, I mean, I don't know, are we talking about evangelicalism now? What part of what you just said do you want to dive in on?
There's like 85 ways that we could go from there, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'd actually like to circle back to your story. So you have a point that I uniquely and 100% identify with, but I would love to know what brought you to that point. Like you obviously came to a point where church wasn't meeting the needs of yourself and your family. And how did you get there? Like what pushed you to that point? What's your what made you into the person who would found Americannone?
Oh man. Well, the short answer to that is I wrote a book about it. That really is what my book is. I describe it as part memoir, part credo, and part romp and pop culture. And so I basically was raised in a Christian cult.
Okay.
And that was extremely traumatic. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 10 years as an agnostic, during which time I studied all different world religions, and I studied philosophy of religion in my undergraduate work. And then I ended up trying to reconcile with Christianity again, because through the study of Christianity from an academic perspective, I learned that Jesus was actually a pretty radical dude.
Yeah.
A social reformer. He was. I learned the social justice Jesus through the university, not through church.
Right.
And then I was like, well, hey, maybe I ought to give Jesus a chance again. Mm-hmm. And so I returned after 10 years, and basically the decade of my 20s. Went to seminary at SMU. I'm in Dallas.
Okay.
Howdy from Texas, where all the fun things are going on. Yeah, stuff they were so proud of.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, I went to seminary trying to sort that out, the social justice Jesus, in my late 20s, but ended up taking a detour in evangelical Christianity, because that was the closest thing to what I was raised in. And I think there was something psychological recessed going on, like, exactly, like, I need to make peace with this kind of thing. So no better way to make peace with something than to go right back to it.
Then to dive right back in.
Yeah. And it just ended up being a nightmare. And so a marriage and a divorce later, and I returned to graduate school at Perkins at SMU for my master's in theology, which is a very liberal seminary, I should say, very progressive. And that's when I returned back to the Methodist church. I was like, okay, I can handle this, because these people, they're not trying to tell me to stay in an abusive marriage. They're not trying to, tell me that as a female, I only have X amount of purpose in this world or whatever.
Yep.
But the problem that I found, even with the progressive form of Christianity, was that there was a lot of talking out of both sides of the mouth, and I couldn't handle it. We would recite these creeds and we would say these things from the pulpit or from the chancel that to any layperson would sound like, hey, I'm supposed to believe literally that Jesus was born from a virgin, or that Jesus literally rose from the dead. And I'm like, well, that's funny, because that's not what I just learned at the seminary, like 1 block away.
Right.
And yet we're saying this in church. And I started feeling more and more, frankly, like a fraud in church, because even though the people were awesome and I didn't see any harm being done to other people, but unlike my evangelical experience, it just wasn't authentic for me. Not to mention that I've studied all these other religions. I've been influenced by Taoism and Buddhism and by Carl Sagan. And there's wisdom even in SpongeBob. I mean, I will say, if you get a chance. So the point is that I realized I could no longer pigeonhole my spiritual identity with one label. So therefore, no labels was the answer. Is that your question? I almost forgot what the question was.
No, you did it. You did it well. You knocked it out of the park. And I think that that's an interesting point that brings us right back around to where we started, which is this idea of coalescing a spirituality without a theological pigeonhole behind it, right? What do we really need to major on? What do we really need to do? What are we here for, So what made you make the jump then from that sort of understanding and wanting to get outside of the pigeonhole to starting a movement? What is the goal with American Nuns? What do you hope to do with it?
Well, for one thing, I didn't start the movement. All I'm trying to do is put a name and a face to it. And when I say face, I don't even necessarily mean me. I just mean make something public facing so that people can go, oh, whoa, wait, there's a space for me.
Right.
Because the movement has been happening really over the past 3 decades or so, and it's really just continued to pick up steam in the past 10 years. But due to the nature of people who are free thinkers, open-minded people, and we leave these organized kind of situations, we're it's like herding cats, right? And so, but the funny thing is, we're trying to herd cats, but at the same time, we're a bunch of lonely cats.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And so when I finally decided to leave the church, and realized I was a nun, the number one reason that I was motivated to start American Nun and to write my book was because I was so darn lonely.
Yeah.
I mean, I had friends, and I had colleagues. It wasn't like I was living in a cave somewhere, but I was spiritually lonely.
Right.
Where are the people that I see on a Pew report? There's, 100 million of them.
Yeah.
Where are they? Where can we have conversation and talk?
Yeah. So you're essentially a community organizer, right? Which is what a pastor is if you take away the I love that. No, I love that, because that's the work that I found myself drawn to when I found myself pushed out of the church because of coming to the understanding that my fundamental nature was queer, and I was unapologetic for that. I truly believe that just if you believe in the sort of metaphor of, the dove descending upon Jesus when he was baptized, right? That's when Jesus's ministry started, right? A lot of people don't really realize that sort of nuance, but of the, 33 years that Jesus lived, 3 of them were the only years he spent in ministry. And before that, we don't really know almost anything about historical Jesus, but the dove descends on him and boom, his ministry takes off. And for me, coming out was my baptism of sorts, right? Awesome. And I've just been pushed further from the church since that. But this darn plucky sense of optimism about spirituality mattering won't go away. And so I too, a lot of times find myself to be this person without a flag.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what I really was excited about in your work, was like, what now? Like everything has changed, and what now? And I would love to hear more about that from you.
Well, so that was when I first started kicking the tires on this concept. That was one of the frequent questions that was posed to me was, well, how are you going to rally a bunch of people that, you know, are leaving? So, you know what I mean? And what are you going to rally around? And it actually reminded me of, I believe it's the theologian, Trelsch, I think is his name. And he referred to Jesus as the rallying point for the community. And so if we're leaving organized religion, and if people are gleaning their wisdom and inspiration from multiple sources, then what is there to rally around? Well, that's when it's like, I don't know, the dove or a coconut on the head or whatever, but that's when this came to mind.
I love that.
Because who can disagree with that?
Right. You can't.
Who can disagree that love is the one and the only unifying force amongst us? And you can call yourself, you can give yourself any darn label you want, religious, sexual orientation, political orientation, whatever. And if we can agree on this, now the problem is even this can be misused, right? The word love, the concept of love can be abused just like anything else can, because humans are awesome at that.
So good at it.
but I like to say love is like porn. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
I'm ready for it. This is going to be a great soundbite for the opening.
So there was the quote in from the late 70s, I believe it was, a US Supreme Court justice who was having to define what porn is. Because there's some case before the Supreme Court, and they were trying to literally define what's the difference between porn and Italian Renaissance art, for example. Right. And this Supreme Court justice said, I know it when I see it. When I see it, I know the difference between porn and art. It's that simple. Same thing with love. Yeah. We know love when we experience love. When you have experienced true love, and I'm not talking necessarily romantic love at all. You know what I mean? Just love. Yeah. The kindness of a stranger, someone who surfaces in your life that you least expected to shelter you and shoulder you through the hardest times in your life. You know, different manifestations of love that we experience. When we experience it, we know it. It's like when you travel to another country and you can have an exchange with someone without even knowing their language, and you know that there was a human connection, an exchange of love there. So that's what I realized that's the rallying point. And this is also a distinction that I'm hoping, as I continue to, you know, chip away at trying to build a community and get this message out there. That's also a differentiation from what I hope people will feel from the atheist movement of the 20th century. And I'm not disparaging atheists. Let me be very clear. Again, that's another label that can be misused, abused, can mean, the label's irrelevant. Some of the most loving people I know identify as atheists. It's irrelevant. But they had a PR problem. The atheist movement of the 20th century had a PR problem because there were a few people with bullhorns that were very antagonistic and condescending toward persons of faith. And so I'm hoping that this phenomenon of the nuns kind of burgeoning in our country, if we can tee it off right from the beginning, that listen, this is a message of love. This is not about you're wrong and I'm right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's the point that I've come to within my own life is I've lost the interest really in debating for most of the time. Like I like learning. I mean, I'm a theology student. Like that's what I do. I do interfaith study. I did like 35 hours of one interfaith course last week because it was an intensive week. But as much as I love that, practically, I don't see the need to debate much. I see the need to act. And I think the most common rallying point, both as a religious person and as a community organizer, as a social worker, is love and doing what is most loving. And that, like you said, that word has been stretched. But I think that if we're really pressed, we can tell when the word love is being stretched, right?
Yeah.
So we have to rally around that. What does that look like for an American nun? How do we rally? How do we coalesce? How do we build community?
Well, if you don't mind, can we table that question for a second? Because you
Yeah.
touched on something that I think is very important to provide an illustration.
Yeah.
This notion of misusing the word love, and I think one of the greatest examples of that are Christians who think that the loving thing to do is deconversion therapy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the most salient examples of the misuse of love.
Mm-hmm.
That it's because I love you that I'm going to try to, shame you and force you to be something or someone that you're not. And so the very definition of what love is and how it acts in the world, that's actually what I want to explore in my second book. And get very practical about it, because the Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 13, I think 3-5 or something, love is patient, love is kind, and I'm like, well, you know what? I think that Osama bin Laden was patient.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Osama bin Laden was also kind to his people, from what I read.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, we have to be more cognizant of what it means, of what love means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because not all patience is love.
Right.
Love is patient, but not all patience is love.
Right.
Right. And so anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because I've seen the misuse of love in Christian circles and it grosses me out.
Oh, agreed. And I think that's interfaith work. It's really disgusting. It's something that I've seen in interfaith work and in community organizations as well, as that like people misuse this idea of love. But you can't be simultaneously loving somebody and working against their best interest. You can't be simultaneously loving somebody and taking away their agency. Like there are things which, like, I'm a verbal processor, so I would work it out in a conversation, but there are things that love cannot coexist with. And I think maybe that's what we need to do, because if we're going to form any intersectional movement, we can absolutely center on what love is, but that means we need to be conscious, even within ourselves, of what does love look like to the other? What does love look like to someone who's different?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's funny, I have right behind me this Norman Rockwell painting, the do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I've seen some things circulating on Instagram lately of people saying, that there's something flawed with that concept, and that it should be do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Mm-hmm. And I get where they're going there. But fundamentally, if you really just keep peeling back the onion and peeling back the onion, to do unto someone else the way you would want done unto you is to respect their agency. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is to respect their own intrinsic value and right to find themselves and be who they are, short of harming others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And the problem is that where the harming of others is a marker that's been moved, right. Because like I was raised by my mom and stepdad to believe that, it was our moral obligation to try to convert the Jews. That's how they referred to them. I know it sounds terribly prerogative.
Derogatory.
Thank you. But that was the way that they talked, and they thought that was the loving thing to do. And I mean, oh my Lord, I made my mea culpa in here of that type of mentality. But so there needs to be a collective conversation about what love means.
I think so, because I feel like that's the one thing that everybody wants to pull together around. But we need to understand what love is from a Muslim perspective, a Jewish perspective, a Christian perspective, a Taoist perspective, a Buddhist perspective. And these things all differ because there's no one central tenet of life, you know what I mean? And I was just reading about morality and ethics and can they exist without religion, and you know, how does that play into each other? But I think that we have to have sort of those tough conversations, especially if we're going to come together as a community, because ultimately I think love is a verb and we need to take action out of that love. And so what does that mean for us as a community of diverse people? How do we enact love in the world?
Well, do you think that quite simply that means allowing others to have their own agency short of not harming others?
I think that that's probably one of the closest things that I've heard. And this is something I talk about like all the time. Like literally, we've probably had so many parallel conversations in terms of this because I'm always asking people this, but I think that's one of the actual best definitions that I've heard, right? Because
well, no, I'm glad that resonates because I don't know. I've been trying to come up with that too. I'm sorry, I just interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's perfect. This is a conversation. Two ways, has to proceed unpredictably. I looked up the definition of conversation before I named my podcast that. One of the tenets of a conversation is that it has to proceed at least in some measure unpredictably. And so that's why I don't do too much planning for these things. But yeah, I think that idea of love is something, is that what you plan to process, like talk about in your next book?
Yes.
Awesome. When are you, what's the like timetable like that? Are you still like dream boarding it? Are you in final editing? Like, are you still?
Gosh, I wish. No, no, I have an outline. But I'm doing some kind of mining for, you know, information and concepts and things like that. And through the course of conversation, you know, finding out how people, how they perceive of it and where the holes are in their understanding. Like I knew someone who, like you just said, that love is a verb. And I knew someone that said to me, words don't matter, only action does. And then the more I thought about it, it's like, no, I think they both matter. But then they also both don't matter.
Yeah.
That's the tension.
Right.
You're right, because even really good loving people can really do shitty things sometimes. And so we have to find that space between the paradox of, or the dichotomy between action and words, or between, you know, you did this, but you should have done this, but it doesn't make you all one or the other. You know what I mean? And
absolutely. I was reading some about that, something along those lines. You know, I haven't watched the special recently, but I heard that Dave Chappelle said some dumbass stuff that basically was not good and people want to cancel him. And so I was reading today about the tension between calling somebody out and calling somebody in. And I think that could be, you know, cancel culture versus the chance for something to develop. I think I wish I could take credit for it, in an effort to credit Black and brown women, especially with their intellectual property. This was from a Black thinker, a Black female thinker. I'll drop her name in the comments later, everybody, just so you know. But that difference between calling out and calling in is the difference between just kind of doing something to like damn the man or doing something with love. I think that's a practical way to see, like, maybe we can create a more loving dialogue around this thing that happened wrong and not completely throw the person out, you know?
Right. Yes, I agree. And obviously, you know, at some point, sometimes the most loving thing to do is to say no more of something with someone.
And you do hit that
but
wall.
You know why? But you know why that's the most loving thing to do? Like I decided when I left my ex-husband, I decided that the most loving thing I could do for him was to leave. I tried all these other things, but I decided that was the most loving thing for me to do is to leave. You know why? Because it gave him all of his own agency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You decide who you want to be. You
Mm-hmm.
decide what choices and I'm not here to bash him. I'm just saying that's an
Right.
example of sometimes you do have to make a call, but that can be of love
Mm-hmm.
if it affirms somebody's agency and their path to growth.
Absolutely.
When people ask me, because so many people ask me this all the time, not really. I just think about it. Maybe I dream that somebody someday is going to ask me this, but I have an answer.
Got it.
But I have had this conversation before with some people over the years. But the whole idea of, what's the purpose of life?
Mm-hmm.
I've really decided, for me, I define that to be to grow.
Mm-hmm.
To grow, because we're not going to always feel happy. We're not going to always even feel joy. I think for me, I feel like I have joy always, but I'm not always tapping into it.
Right.
Sometimes it's a little recessed. But I can always grow.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing that I have agency over.
Mm-hmm.
I can choose growth.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's that, what, today, so-and-so said something that really hurt my feelings, but I'm just going to let that go because that is a reflection of whatever's going on with so-and-so and not me. It could be something really little, but it can be growth.
And that's loving towards yourself too, if you want to tie it back to that same axiom, and also perhaps not retaliating would be the most loving thing that you could do to that person too. That's something that would depend on
that's a given. That's a given. I mean, because I guess what I was trying to say is that sometimes growth are these little bitty internal decisions we make, right? That it doesn't it may not show to anybody else, but you can, oh, wow, that was a victory for me today. I was able to, because for me, I retaliation is not something that I would be inclined to right away. So for me, the victory would be like, oh, wow, I can just, I just let that go. You know what I mean? And anyway, so growth to me is really central to love and allowing other people to grow.
So that the organizing ethic, let's say, or central kind of gathering cry of the American nun, as you see it, would be this ethos of love. What are some other hallmarks that you would hope that we could coalesce around as American nuns, or even some points from your book that you'd like to share about the topic?
Sure, that's a great question. And I just feel the need to tell your audience that this is water, not moonshine.
Straight up vodka.
Well, because I'm drinking out of a giant mason jar, and so it just looks like I've got my moonshine.
And you're from Texas, so.
But I'm actually really glad that you asked that specific question, because see right there, you see the circle with the greater than sign there. So the greater than sign is a derivative of this, that love is greater, and then the circle represents the oneness of humanity. One earth, one human family. And then love is the one thing that unifies and brings us all together. And so the two primary, the chief message is love is greater, end of story. But the second one is that we are one human family. We've got one home. And if COVID didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that.
Yeah.
Not to mention global warming and all these things. These are all shared problems.
Right.
And so it's time that we move the goalpost in terms of what our objectives are. I actually started a change.org petition a year or so ago, called A Call for a Responsible Religion. And what I'm saying is, listen, for people who aren't religious, let's not fool ourselves. Religion isn't going anywhere. All right. It's going to be around for a long time. And so what we need to do is we need to reinvent what's acceptable within it, or redefine what's acceptable within it. And so in my change.org petition that I did through American Nun, I'm saying, listen, we used to throw babies in volcanoes and marry, off 8-year-old brides to 60-year-old men and do all kinds of heinous things in the name of religion. And some of that stuff is probably still going on in some places somewhere. But it's time that we redefine what's acceptable within the realm of religion. And the symbol or the message that you were asking about, messaging of the one human family, I think with the shrinking of the globe, we're now starting to have these conversations, realizing that, we're all in this together. We better figure some shit out.
Yeah, we really are. We really are. And it doesn't take a religious affiliation to give a shit. You know what I mean? It really doesn't. Like we can have all of these practicalities and still come together and being like, this is our cultural non-negotiable. And if we have to, I like your analogy of like kind of moving the chains forward, like this is where we need to go now. You know what I mean? I think that that's an incredibly wise statement. What in your mind would a more responsible religion look like? How would that play out?
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
I like to ask some nice small questions, just bite-sized.
Yeah. Well, being the philosophically trained person that I am, I mean, my brain is immediately going, that unravels like a million different other questions. It's like, well, let's define what religion is. And let's define, I actually did define it in my book. But I think a few things come to mind, and I guess the easiest answer to that is to draw upon the values that I had, established for americannone as an organization, and that is one that embraces science, so that we're not being asked to believe things literally, that science proves is not the case. One that embraces reason. Now, even with the understanding of reason, it depends on what your premise is in terms of how reasonable your conclusion is. But there needs to be a place for science and reason, and inclusivity, compassion, and results.
Ooh, I like that.
Because if you spend all your time sprinkling fairy dust and bowing and doing whatever in the name of a religion, but it doesn't make you a kinder, gentler, more loving human being, or you don't turn around and make the earth a better place in your own way, then I fuck that shit. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, if it didn't result in something positive, then
I love that. I love those values that you laid out, because they're so all encompassing. And the sort of like scientific academic practicality in me loved when you brought up the R word of results, because there's a lot of times when we can create beautiful plans and we can talk about intersectional dialogue and community building, but the end line is like, what are we doing, and can we doing anything? And I'm not saying I need results like numbers in a pew, but I'm saying we need to be actively doing what we say. We need to actively be living into our commitments. And I say that phrase somewhat ironically because it's a class I'm taking right now called Living into Our Commitments. But I think that if we have commitments, they should bear with them action. Otherwise, what's the point? You know what I mean?
Yes.
What's the point? There's an interesting thing I learned in my Abrahamic faiths class last week, and I would love to share it with you if you have a moment.
Please.
So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all based on the story of Abraham. So literally Islam and Judaism, they actually refer to all three religions as people of the book. And Islam and Judaism, neither of them have any prohibitions against people of the book marrying other people of the book. And Islam goes so far as to say, we respect the Torah, we respect the Hebrew Bible, we respect the Bible in so much as it doesn't conflict with the Quran, right? So first of all, Islam has been painted as this exclusionary radicalist thing when it's actually meant to be the fulfillment and the the teasing out and the taking to a higher level, right? But what's interesting when you look at the story of Abraham in the Torah and in the Christian text, right, is that we don't know if Isaac has any agency, right? For those of you who are watching and might not have heard this story, in the Torah, which is the Jewish scriptures, portion of the Jewish scriptures, then we have the Christian Bible, then we have the Quran. Abraham is supposed to be a patriarch of the faith, right? He's this dude that like kicks shit off, right? Abraham has two sons. I'm not going to go into all of it because it's too much, but Abraham has a son named Isaac, right? And at one point, and this story is in all of the scriptures for all three faiths, at one point, Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac to please God. And there's a very interesting point in the Abrahamic scriptures, or in the Judaism scriptures of the Torah, right? And in the Christian Bible, we don't know if Isaac has any agency. And the Abraham figure is just told to do this by God. But when you look in the Quran, Allah and Abraham have a dialogue. And throughout their dialogue, Abraham reasons with Allah and comes to an understanding of like why this needs to happen. And Isaac has agency in the situation. He doesn't have that in the Torah or the Bible. Isaac is allowed to determine to be a part of this sacrifice. And something that I learned about Islam this past week is that there is a focus on reasoning. And I think that that's so cool and intersects so much with what you're saying, because we're talking about agency and we're talking about reasoning. And here that is in a faith that's been like demonized. So that's my little rabbit trail. But I think it's interesting that even within a monotheistic religion, there's an encouragement of reason. Yeah. And I think so many times, I don't know if you experienced this within evangelicalism, but I did. One of the reasons they just don't fucking like me is that I'm not willing to check my brain at the door to be a part of a system.
Amen.
Right. And so that idea that reason could be brought into the spiritual realm, into the spirit, and make it not just into the spiritual realm, but it's a tenet of spirituality. Yeah. How much would that change things, you know?
Yeah.
I love that you listed that in the values. Sorry to go off on that little tangent, but I really like that was a finer point of the conversation that really intrigued me, because that's something that I believe in. And I had always been told it was incompatible with religion. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many times you said that you were like told stuff to believe and you're like, I can't do this. Like, how many times were you told to believe stuff that just defied all reason?
Oh, my entire childhood, for one thing. And then my romp in evangelicalism again in my marriage. Yeah. It was funny though, when you were telling that story, I was just visualizing the Veggie Tales with like the broccoli taking the little baby asparagus up to be sacrificed.
Absolutely watched that 100%. Oh man, that was a whole evangelical idea in and of itself. Telling stories of sacred scripture with vegetables. Welcome to it. I love that so much.
You're telling this nice, like, rich story, and I'm thinking of like, oh yeah, I remember the broccoli and the asparagus. I think there were some like green peas on the side or something. There maybe. I don't know.
Now I'm singing the VeggieTales theme song. Everything's fine. Last night I had the Bagel Bites theme song stuck in my head, so I guess the VeggieTales theme song is better. I was at the refrigerator last night and I was like, babe, do you ever just like have the Bagel Bites theme song stuck in your head? And she's like, no, like, I don't think ever. And then I started singing and she's like, yep, that's been stuck in my head before. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for that.
Oh man, that's so funny. Is there anything else, like any other main points of your book that you'd like to tease out? Because those values were really great. And admittedly, I haven't read your whole book. I've just read stuff that you've put online. I haven't read your book in totality. So I'd love to hear anything else that you'd love to share about us, about maybe things that you were really passionate about that you put in, or even things that you learned through the writing of it.
Sure. So I think, if I had to pick one thing, the being raised by my mom and my stepdad in this Christian cult, and then seeing, my dad was not around as much when I was really young, but he was an atheist. And so, excuse me, just one second. Let me get some.
I gotta get some more
moonshine. I need some moonshine.
I'm going to insert a little graphic for YouTube that says this is not moonshine.
But I really think that I have loved people who are deeply religious. I've loved people who are not religious at all and are pretty staunch atheists. Mm-hmm. And what I would love to see more than anything is for fundamentalism of any kind mm-hmm. to evaporate, recede, mm-hmm. and so that we can see each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And be with one another and love one another mm-hmm. with all of these constructs that we build up and that we use to hide behind or throw arrows at from behind a wall to other people. You know, that's why love is greater than labels. That will be my message for the rest of my life, because I've known some atheists that I truly believe embodied Jesus better than a ton of Christians, self-professed Christians that I know. And I know some Christians who are angels on earth. I don't mean that literally, but you know what I mean? That some atheist people would just balk at because they do believe Jesus literally rose from the dead. Mm-hmm. And I don't care if they believe that.
Right.
That's not my place to make a judgment on that. And so I just, if there were one theme, I think this is also going back into the Freudian thing, is, you know, I've been trying to reconcile the differences of having such polarizing worldviews in my parents mm-hmm. From being a child, but that plays out into the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for it, because I've seen how I've learned love from both of my parents in their own ways. Mm-hmm. And I really, really believe in love. And that's my hope.
I love that. I love that so much. Your passion for that concept is palpable. And I look forward to picking up your book, because now it's a must read for me after I read the 30 other books I have to read for this semester. But I also look forward to the working out of that and fleshing out of that verbally as your second book comes out. I think that's really, really, I think it's a crucial piece in this sort of intersectional conversation that we need to have if we're going to build a better, more cohesive world, right? Like that's what we need. I mentioned to you a little bit before off camera that I want to, my passion is to pursue a PhD in queer theology, and queer theology doesn't have to do with orientation. It is about orientation in some parts, but not in whole. What queer theology is a belief in the dissolution of artificial binary separations. Yeah. And I think that essentialist identities, or like you said, fundamentalist ideals, no matter where they fall in the perspective, they create a binary. And when you have a binary, you create an other. And when you have an other, it's easier to perpetuate things upon them, to take things from them, to step on them. And so I think that when we dissolve that binary and we truly believe that love is greater than division, we decrease the chance for othering, and we increase the chance for community and for love and for positivity.
Amen.
Done. Hitting end right now. Not just kidding.
Yeah. Amen. That's right. And I wrote about that too. The the both and versus the either or. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that hopefully we'll be having kind of a renaissance in our country with that type of thinking. And I think this whole movement of people moving away from labels in general mm-hmm. is a step into that space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It is. Love is absolutely greater than labels, and it should transcend them, because it's not that I don't want people to have identities. I think everybody should have the exact and most specific way to articulate their existence, but I don't think that we should let it be a cause for division. And I think that that's, if we're going to build a better world, it's going to be through the nuns. It's going to be through the queers, right? It's going to be through the intersections. If we're going to build a better world, it's going to happen through that.
That's the only way it can.
Yep.
Otherwise it spirals out just, into polarizing differences. And I'm so glad you mentioned what you just said, because it's important to say that even though I'm saying love is greater than labels, I'm not saying that there's not a place for labels. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Because we all, like, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a, whatever. And that's just how we navigate the world, right? And there's nothing wrong with feeling proud in whatever label you want to give yourself. Yep. But it's just that love is greater.
Exactly. Yep.
You know what I mean?
It's non-essentialist. Like, you can have agency without it being essentialist. You can have agency without it being a dividing wall. You know what I mean? It can be like a hello, this is my business card, as opposed to like, don't cross this line, right?
Right. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Rachel, you're fantastic. You're great. I wouldn't care if it was moonshine in the jar. I had a great time with you tonight. I would love for you to do me a quick favor. And if you could, you already stole my last question, which is, if there's one thing we could leave, you'd want to leave the audience with, but you literally zoomed past that because you just did it. But if you could do us a favor, can you let people know how they can get in touch with you, your work, the Association of American Nuns, anything that you want to do? Here is your chance for just a completely shameless commercial.
Okay, 1-800. Let's see. So americannone.com. That's American and then NONE.com. You can find out more information just about nuns in general, and also follow American None on Instagram, Facebook. Instagram is kind of where I'm really trying to foster the community, because that seems to be where most of this kind of conversation is taking place. Twitter, we have a Twitter account, but Twitter can be a little, dicey at times. And then my personal, I love to engage with people on my personal Instagram as well, because I get more personal on that page, and that's Rachael_L_Roberts with an S. And you can also check out loveisgreater.world. That is a new concept. It's in beta right now, but it's basically it's a merchandise company that's selling messaging like this to help fund the American None initiative.
Very cool.
Because we live in the real world. We gotta
capitalism, bro.
Yeah, well, you gotta, it takes money.
I had a friend, actually my professor last week, and we were talking, and he was just saying, like, he really loves the work that I'm doing with conversations, and even the questions I was asking. And I was like, if only I could get paid. And he looked at me and he's like, honestly, Jesus couldn't have survived in a capitalist society. He was an itinerant preacher who didn't even cook for himself. And I was like, oh shit, you're right.
I'm doomed. Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. Oh God, my options are limiting here. Hashtag OnlyFans. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, Mom. Rachel, it's been a pure joy. I'm going to drop all of these links in this video. I'm going to put them in the YouTube, and I'm going to put them in the podcast. And when you get that second book written, I'm just putting a little plug in here that we would love like a pre-release conversation with you.
Oh, awesome. That'd be fun. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, friends, this has been Conversations. I'm leowt. This is my friend Rachael. And thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for those of you who are going to spend some time with us on the replay. I know someone's going to listen to it on the treadmill, but wherever you can engage with this conversation, I want to say thank you for being a person who wants to listen and who wants to hear and who wants to be a part of the conversation. If you have any ideas that you'd like to see talked about on Conversations, throw them my way. I'm more than open. You can find Conversations all over social media. You can find all of our links at conversationsofficial.com. And I would like to make a slight plea to you, and that is, I literally cannot keep this up on my own without your help. And so I have thrown up a Patreon. You can find the link on conversationsofficial.com. And if you would be interested in helping fund this work to literally keep the lights on, you can sign up on Patreon to make a monthly donation, and there will be some perks forthcoming. I'm working them out as you speak. So thank you for being a part of the Conversations family. Thank you, Rachel, for joining the Conversations family. And we look so forward to hearing what comes from you in the future. Thank you, Leo. This has been a lot of fun. Absolutely. Have a great night. Everybody else, we'll see you next week. Have a good night. Bye.
This has been the Conversations Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.